Hi, I'm Isaiah McPeak, CEO at Ethos Publications. I'm here to teach you about the basics of Parli debate. The STOA tournaments, the independent tournaments, and possibly upcoming NCFCA tournaments all have Parli in mind as an event for high school students, which is a really cool opportunity that wasn't available back when I was debating. So I want to give some of my experience in Parli from college, where I've won some tournaments, I was first place speaker a few times, and I've coached the Patrick Henry debate team. I've gone on since then to not only learn about American Parli, but also other formats such as British Parli, and I think I'll be able to share with you some of the basics of parliamentary debate and eventually advanced strategies in future sessions. But today, all I have in mind is to teach you really just how a Parli round works. You might be somebody who has never debated a Parli round, and in fact I hope you are if you're watching this, and is just interested in seeing, so how would this work, what would it actually look like at a tournament, and what do I need to do to get ready? So we're going to talk in this video about the format, about flowing, about some of the customs of parliamentary debate, about prep time, about rules, and some of the basic strategies. In the next video, we'll look at how to interpret the various types of resolution, fact, value, policy, metaphor, things in between, what to do with them, and then the following videos will include example debate rounds on those various types of resolutions. And my intent for you with those is to go ahead and prep one side or the other on each of those resolutions so you can have a case or some opposition positions going into the round and then see what actually happened and how you might have interacted with what the teams did in those debate rounds. So let's get started at the top with the format of parliamentary debate. Now, we're talking about American parliamentary debate here, which has two teams of two. So a government team, which you would think of as affirmative, they're assigned to the proposition, which is another word for the resolution. So sometimes they're called the proposition team, usually they're called the government team. This is based on the British parliamentary format of actual British Parliament, where you have a chairperson, and then you have the ruling party, who happens to have the prime minister, and they're called the government, and they propose policies. And then you have the leading opposition party, and they have a special person called the leader of opposition, who has rights to speak first before everybody else in the House does. And then you have members of both sides, and you have an argument, and they're always directing their debate towards the chairperson rather than towards the other people in the room. It's kind of like a Robert's Rules of Order thing. It's a parliamentary rules of order type of format. So what you want to be able to do is to have in mind government equals affirmative in your normal parlance, and opposition equals negative. The government affirms or proposes the resolution, and the opposition opposes the resolution. And that's the basic framework for the debate and the names. Now, you end up with 6 speeches instead of perhaps you're used to 8, and there's no cross-examination. So the speech times vary from league to league. In NPDA, the big national college circuit, you end up with a 7-8-8-8-4-5 format, where the government team has a shorter constructive for their first speech, but then they have a longer rebuttal than the opposing team. However, in STOA, the format that they've been practicing with has a 7-7-7-5-5 format. So you end up with, like you would normally expect, the opening speech being the 1AC. Normally, we're going to call it the PMC. In fact, let me get those names up for you on the board. The PMC, which stands for a speaker position, the Prime Minister. That's the 1A, the Prime Minister, is giving a constructive. That PMC is 7 minutes long. Then the Leader of Opposition, a person, is giving their constructive. So you call this the PMC and the LOC. They both establish the cases for the government and the opposition teams. Following that, you have the members, and in this case, the member of government, so the MG, has a 7-minute speech. There's no letter after that because this is their only speech in the round. And then there is a MO, the member of opposition, which, as you have probably guessed, has 7-minute speech time. Then you have the negative block, just like you would expect. So the leader of opposition comes down and gives the next speech, which is the leader of opposition's rebuttal. No new arguments are allowed in this rebuttal. And finally, you have the Prime Minister's rebuttal. These are both worth 5 minutes. Now, just keep in mind that while neither rebuttals are supposed to introduce new arguments, This PMR is the first time that the government team has been able to address the arguments brought up in the member of opposition speech, which is a constructive. So it is very advisable for the opposition team to have a strategy that doesn't split the negative, where the leader presents one set of arguments and the member another. They want to do what's called shell and extend, which you can read about on the Ethos blog. But it means that the leader puts out all the arguments at a more shallow level, and then the member extends those same arguments. When we talk more about strategy, we'll talk more about that and how devastating a PMR can be against arguments that were new in the MO. But now let's talk about flowing the debate round. Since there are only 6 speeches, you would think this isn't going to take up that much paper, but I find that parley flowing ends up taking more paper than any other type of debate I've done, including mock trial and moot court, because you end up not knowing going into the round how many pieces of paper you're going to be using, especially if you're opposition. You're going to prepare several positions on their own piece of paper, and you may or may not use some of them. For example, you might have 3 topicality presses going into a round. You're going to want to prepare those on separate sheets of paper, and one might be on one word of the resolution, and one on another, and one on still another, and the government team violates just one of those topicality presses. Well, you don't want to run the 2 that you prepared that don't apply, so you chuck them aside, and you just take that one piece of paper. Then you don't know how many pieces of paper you need to flow their case. Typically, the rule of thumb is you want to flow a single position on a single piece of paper. So you're going to want to go ahead and write in a column that position. But what you want to do is give yourself enough space for a lot to happen, because in a parliamentary round, arguments tend to go deeper rather than wider. You end up having many responses, and then the round finally starts to tailor down in the rebuttal phases, but you can, at the end of that, take this one piece of paper. Let's say this is topicality and there's only one topicality press running the whole round. The judge and both teams, before the rebuttals, can take that piece of paper and say, here are all the arguments that happened in this round concerning topicality. And they can kind of weigh them against each other and, in fact, organize all of their flowing by those pieces of paper. So what you'll sometimes see is the leader of opposition come up and they're going to say, we have 2 off-case positions, which means that when the government team gave their opening constructive, that there are more pieces of paper you're going to need. 2 more pieces of paper. One may be a topicality press, one may be a disadvantage that doesn't directly refute something the other team said that you already have flowed on paper. So take out 2 new pieces of paper. But what if the government team, when addressing those arguments, and let's say they had 2 contentions and a plan, they come back and they say, I want to address topicality first, then my 2 contentions, then the plan, then the disadvantage. You can just reshuffle your paper in that order, and the judge can too, and it's much easier to keep track of. So we find that this type of flowing is good because it lends itself to your prep time period, and it lends itself to clear organization in a debate round where you have who knows how many topics being discussed. It's just not as predictable as debates where the resolution is in place the entire year. So understand that you've got multiple pieces of paper, especially if you're up, and you want to just have one major position on each. So let's say you're running a case, you have maybe your interpretation up here. That's going to be defining the words of the resolution and maybe giving a criteria to weigh the resolution. Then you're going to have contention 1. Whole big contention, and you want to prepare here, you want to prepare your points, so A, B, and C for that contention, and you want to have lots of examples, because examples are really at the heart of parley, is proving your points with examples. So you're going to need a lot of space to write all these things out, and that's going to all prove the main contention, contention 1. And then this might be, let's say this is the plan, if you have a plan, and then let's say this is contention 3, same thing. So now, if any solvency arguments come up, they probably ought to come up right here on the plan page unless they're directly refuting a point you made in one of your contentions. And then I think you get the point. Basically, use lots of paper and separate out in enough space so you can keep arguments organized based on which type of argument they are refuting in the round. Moving on from flowing. Some of the customs of parliamentary debate include points of information and knocking on tables, or some people saying for shame. Let me talk about those really quickly. Basically, you should go watch one of Tony Blair's, or any prime minister really, but his were the best, Questions with the Prime Minister. All you have to do is go to cspan.org and type in Questions Prime Minister. And you'll get what happens every week, which is that the Prime Minister is questioned for 30 minutes by the House of Commons, I think, by Parliament. And it always starts with the Leader of Opposition, and they go back and forth, and they have a great argument, and then all the lords say, "Hear, hear, hear," or they say, "Boo," or they say, "For shame," or something like that. There's a lot of noise, a lot of rabble, and then the Speaker of the House says, "Order, order," and he's really old, and for some reason they listen to him some of the time, but, for like the next 5 seconds, they remembered what he said. So, in a parley round, it does get ridiculous when everybody is knocking and saying, "Boo," or "Hear, hear," for their teammates, so you have to really keep a lid on this because it's a competitive debate environment. However, there is some knocking that is customary. For example, anytime an opponent or your partner has concluded a speech, it's polite for everybody to knock on the table or whatever is in front of them to make a little rapping sound that says, "Good job." Every time. It's a sign of respect. For shame and booing, you really should just stay away from that if you're debating. If you're watching, honestly, you should stay away from it too. If the judge starts saying for shame, maybe you can pitch in a little bit, but honestly, that just turns debate rounds really nasty. And I'm talking from having an opponent stand and stare myself and my partner in the face while we're talking and saying, for shame, you liar, for shame." That's not going to happen because you're all nice, but in college leagues it can get a little ridiculous. So you might see some of that, especially of college judges. The next thing, points of information. Well, there are actually 3 types of points that are considered in parley, but different leagues allow different ones to work different ways. Especially as you grow older and are able to use more judgment, you are given more opportunity to use these points. So the basic points are point of information, point of order, and point of personal privilege. The current way Stoa's parley has been set up is that only points of information can be used by the debaters. So let me talk from the bottom up. A point of personal privilege is for when you're trying to correct something or somebody is saying something really nasty, like if they're being absolutely racist towards you and your partner, then you might say, point of personal privilege, "Speaker, would you please make them stop being racist towards myself and my partner?" Okay, that's not going to happen, and I've honestly never seen a point of personal privilege be used. Points of order are reserved for new arguments. Unlike points of information, they stop the clock. And they're used only for rebuttals. Well, generally. A couple times I've seen somebody, point of order, they're using evidence, and they're not allowed to use evidence. I guess that's a fair point. But generally, that's not where you see points of order. You see them in the rebuttals when the opposing team says, point of order, everybody stops their timers because the speaker has one, both teams have one, the judge maybe does have one or maybe not, and usually there's not a timekeeper like a person. But they all stop their timer, and then the team who called the point of order says, "That argument's new, we haven't seen it made in response to this argument here." And then the speaker says, "Actually, my partner made that when he said this under this argument here, so it's not new." And then the judge says, "Point well taken," which means the point is correct, it's a new argument, move on. Point not well taken, which means no, I don't think that this is a new argument, so you can keep arguing it, or point under consideration. Anytime you have a judge panel with 3 judges, they're always going to say point under consideration. But, like I said, that's not something that Stoa is using right now. But you should know what it is, in case you see it on, video rounds that you're watching. So finally, there's the point of